Racist Karen calls 911 when a black man locks his own pool. Then he uncovers a secret that destroys her. The metal key felt solid in Liam's hand, cool and heavy, with the weight of everything it represented. Success, freedom, a home of his own. He squeezed it tighter, barely able to believe it. This isn't supposed to happen for people like me. Not for a black man who grew up on the wrong side of town, who was told from childhood that life would always be harder for him. He had spent years fighting against a system that never wanted to see him win. But here he was. The real estate agent, a middle-aged woman with a permanent sales smile, gave him one last nod before heading down the driveway. "Congratulations again, Mr. Carter. Enjoy your new home." The moment she drove away, Liam exhaled a slow breath, letting his shoulders drop. He turned back to the house, his house, taking in the clean brickwork, the wide windows, and, most importantly, the backyard. He barely made it inside before heading straight to the sliding glass doors. The view was just as perfect as he remembered. The sun cast a golden sheen across the water, rippling softly in the breeze. The pool was pristine, waiting. Liam stepped outside, toes brushing the edge of the stone tiles, and just stood there. For a long time, he didn't move. He just let himself feel it. As a kid, he'd dreamed about this moment. Growing up in a cramped apartment with a busted AC and a broken lock on the front door, he never thought he'd live somewhere like this. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, and his father, well, he wasn't around long enough to make a difference. And then there was the pool. Liam loved swimming. He'd loved it since the first time he saw a pool, clear and blue, like something out of a dream. But where he grew up, kids like him weren't welcome in places like that. He remembered standing outside the school pool, staring through the chain-link fence, watching the white kids splash and race each other while he and the other black kids weren't allowed past the gate. One time when he was 10, he asked the teacher why. She only gave him a tired look and said, "That's just how things are." Now, standing here, looking at his own damn pool, Liam felt a lump rise in his throat. Not anymore. He stripped off his shoes and socks, rolled up his jeans, and stepped into the water. It was warm, smooth against his skin, and when he crouched down, dipping his hands beneath the surface, he let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. He'd made it. Liam spent the next few weeks settling in, finding a routine. Work, gym, grocery runs. But every evening, without fail, he ended up by the pool, unwinding with a beer in hand, enjoying the quiet. But there was something else, something he had noticed since the day he moved in, the woman across the street. Her name is Karen. She was always watching. At first, he thought maybe she was just a nosy neighbor, the kind that kept tabs on everything happening in the cul-de-sac. But the more he saw her, the more uneasy he felt. She didn't just watch, she glared. And then, one afternoon, the quiet was shattered. Liam stepped outside with his drink, only to stop dead in his tracks. A woman was in his pool, not just any woman, his neighbor from across the street. Liam had seen her around before, middle-aged, blonde, always in some kind of floral print. But what he hadn't known, what no one had told him, was that before he moved in, she had been using this pool whenever she pleased. She was floating lazily on a bright yellow inflatable, sunglasses perched on her nose, her arms draped across the sides like she had all the time in the world. Liam blinked. Who the hell did she think she was? He cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Excuse me?" Karen didn't even flinch. "Excuse me," he said again, louder this time. Finally, she turned her head, barely lifting her sunglasses. "Oh, hey. Hey!" Liam stared at her, trying to keep his voice level. "This is my property. You're in my pool." Karen sighed, shifting slightly. "Yeah, I know." "She knew?" Liam opened his mouth, then closed it, trying to process what he was hearing. "Okay. And She waved a hand dismissively. Relax, it's just a pool. I've been swimming here for years. Liam narrowed his eyes. You mean before I bought the house? Karen sat up slightly, arching an eyebrow. Yeah, the old owners were never around much, so I kind of made use of it. It's like a community thing, you know? His jaw clenched. It's not a community thing. It's private property. Karen huffed. Oh, come on. It's hot, and I needed to cool off. You got this big old pool all to yourself. What's the big deal? Liam let out a slow breath, trying to stay calm. The big deal is that you don't live here. You can't just walk into someone else's yard and... She waved him off again. God, you sound uptight. You should really learn to share. Liam felt his patience snap. I'm going to need you to get out of my pool now. Karen scoffed, but after a dramatic sigh, she slid off the float and climbed out. She didn't rush. In fact, she took her sweet time, grabbing one of his towels and patting herself dry before finally looking at him again. You happy now? She asked, rolling her eyes. Liam folded his arms. You people always think you own everything the moment you step in, she muttered, shoving the towel at him. You should be grateful you even have a house like this. Liam felt his stomach turn. People like me? Karen smirked. Oh, please, we both know you got lucky. His fists clenched. Get off my property, she sneered. Or what? Liam pulled his phone from his pocket. Or I call the cops. Karen's face twisted in anger, her cheeks going blotchy red. Wow, so that's how it is, huh? I used this pool for years, and suddenly because you come in, it's a problem? She shook her head, laughing bitterly. Typical. Liam had heard enough. He unlocked his phone, thumb hovering over the dial screen. Last chance, Karen. Her face turned ice cold. You think you're better than me, don't you? She hissed. You don't belong here. Then, finally, she turned on her heel and stomped away, muttering under her breath as she crossed the street. Liam stood there for a long moment, pulse pounding. At first, Liam let it go, assuming she might not have realized what she was doing, but it didn't stop. Every few days, Karen strolled into his backyard as if she had every right to be there. Sometimes she even brought company. With each incident, Liam's irritation grew, but he kept his composure. He repeatedly told her to leave, making it clear that she was trespassing. Karen, however, always had some justification. One afternoon, as she lazily dipped her feet into the water, she dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand. This whole neighborhood was designed for everyone to enjoy, she claimed. If you can afford to live here, then why shouldn't I be able to use it too? Liam felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't just her arrogance, it was the way she said it, the implication buried beneath her words. As if, in her mind, a black man owning a luxury home with a private pool was some sort of mistake, one she had the right to correct. He took a deep breath, trying one last time to make her understand. Karen, I bought this house. This pool isn't for public use. If you want to swim, there are community pools, or you could build your own. Her reaction was immediate and dismissive. That's ridiculous, she scoffed, standing up and grabbing one of his towels like it belonged to her. As she dried herself off, she shot him a pointed look. People like you shouldn't be so selfish. Liam clenched his jaw. His patience had been stretched to its limit. It was no longer just about the pool. Karen didn't see him as a homeowner with rights. She saw him as someone who shouldn't have what he had. By the time she left, he knew one thing for sure. Being polite wasn't going to fix this. Something had to change. Liam had dealt with his fair share of entitled neighbors before, but Karen was something else entirely. It was bad enough that she treated his backyard like a public park, but the way she acted, the way she looked at him, like his very presence in that house was wrong, made his blood boil. He had had enough. The next morning, he took action. He installed a sturdy lock on the gate and set up security cameras around the yard. A large sign now hung on the fence. Private property. No trespassing. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax. The problem was handled, or so he thought. 2 days later, his illusion of peace shattered. While sitting inside, he heard an aggressive rattling from the backyard. His stomach tightened. He pulled out his phone and checked the security feed, already knowing what he would find. Karen. She was gripping the locked gate, shaking it with both hands, her face flushed red with fury. She paced back and forth, muttering under her breath. Through the microphone, he caught fragments of her outrage. Unbelievable! And how dare he? Then she pulled out her phone. Moments later, the sharp wail of sirens filled the air. Liam exhaled heavily. He already knew where this was going. Within minutes, 2 police officers pulled up. Karen ran to them, as if she had been waiting for her saviors, her arms flailing in exaggerated distress. "Thank God you're here!" she cried, pointing dramatically toward the house. "That man is threatening me. He locked me out for no reason. He's trying to intimidate me." Liam stepped outside, keeping his hands where they could be seen. His voice was steady, controlled. "Good afternoon, officers. What seems to be the problem?" One of the cops, an older man with tired eyes, looked Liam up and down before shifting his gaze to Karen, who was breathing heavily like she had just sprinted across the yard. "She says you threatened her," he said, his tone cautious. Liam didn't flinch. "I haven't spoken to her today," he stated evenly, "but I do have security footage." Karen's face twisted in rage. "He's lying," she shrieked. "He's been harassing me for weeks. He put up that lock just to keep me out." Liam unlocked his phone and tapped a few buttons. "Actually, I put up the lock because she keeps trespassing on my private property, and I have the footage to prove it." He handed the phone to the officer. They watched in silence. The video played, showing Karen rattling the gate, her tantrum captured in full clarity. The younger officer leaned in, his brows inching upward as he took in the footage. After a pause, the senior cop, his voice firm and unwavering, said, "Ma'am, this is his property. You have absolutely no right to be here." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, struggling to find an argument that would stick. But, she sputtered, frustration spilling from her voice. "This isn't fair. He's doing this on purpose, keeping me out." "That's right," Liam replied, his voice flat, unimpressed. "That's exactly what I'm doing." The officers shared a look. One turned back to Karen, his expression unreadable but firm. "If you set foot on this property again, you'll be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand?" Karen's face darkened to an alarming shade of purple. A guttural sound of frustration escaped her throat before she spun around and stomped away, her movements stiff with rage. Liam watched her retreat, shaking his head. He knew this wasn't over. People like Karen never just let things go. They struck back. But what she didn't realize was that he wasn't done either. He had an idea, one that would turn the tables in a way she would never see coming. Liam had encountered Karen's kind before, the type of person who carried entitlement like a birthright, who walked through life convinced they were superior. But Karen wasn't just another difficult neighbor. There was a malicious streak in her, a belief that she was entitled to things that weren't hers, and worst of all, she had no shame. After the stunt with the police, Liam assumed she would finally take the loss and back off. Instead, she doubled down. He caught her glaring at him from her front porch, arms folded tightly across her chest, her lips moving in muttered resentment whenever he passed. The hostility in her eyes never wavered, never lessened. It was clear. Karen wasn't finished, and neither was he. Liam knew that if Karen was determined to make his life miserable, he needed to understand exactly who he was dealing with. That night, he sat down at his computer and started digging. At first, it was simple, a basic background check, nothing too revealing. But he wasn't satisfied with surface-level answers, so he went deeper. He combed through public records, old newspaper archives, even ancestry websites. What he found made his stomach churn. Karen's family history wasn't just steeped in privilege, it was drenched in something far uglier. Her grandfather and great-grandfather hadn't just been clan members. They had been leaders, high-ranking figures in one of the most notorious branches of the KKK. The further he dug, the worse it got. There were grainy, black-and-white photos of men in full white robes standing in front of burning crosses. Newspaper clippings linked them to violent rallies, hate-fueled marches, and unspeakable crimes. And it didn't stop there. Karen's parents had carried on the family's hateful legacy. While they had never officially joined the clan, they had openly supported white supremacist causes, donating money to hate groups, attending anti-desegregation protests, and making sure their ideology was passed down to the next generation. Liam leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had suspected Karen's entitlement ran deeper than simple arrogance. But this was generational. No wonder she had reacted so violently to a black man owning something she felt should belong to her. She had been raised to believe people like him had no place at the top. Exhaling slowly, he tapped his fingers against the desk. He had all the proof he needed, but he wasn't about to sit on it. Karen had spent weeks making his life hell. It was time she learned what it felt like to face the consequences of her actions. He had a plan, and she would never see it coming. Liam had never been one to chase revenge. He had always believed in letting karma do its job. But after enduring weeks of Karen's relentless harassment, after she had tried to weaponize the police against him with a false emergency call, and after uncovering the dark, hateful history she came from, he realized something. Karen had never once been held accountable for her actions. That was about to change. Armed with the damning information he had uncovered, Liam didn't call the police. Instead, he reached out to a journalist he knew, someone who had spent years exposing cases of racism and abuse of power. He laid it all out. Karen's blatant entitlement, the lies she spun to frame him, and, most damning of all, the deeply rooted legacy of white supremacy within her family. The journalist didn't just take an interest, he saw a story that needed to be told. Within 24 hours, the exposé was live. The headline was a gut punch. Wealthy woman calls 911 on black neighbor, her family's dark past uncovered. The article peeled back every layer, revealing Karen's long history of harassment and the deeply unsettling truth about her lineage. But this wasn't just some local scandal buried in a corner of the internet. It ignited like a wildfire, spreading across social media, gathering thousands of shares, comments, and reactions. And Karen? She was livid. Liam was watering his lawn when he heard the sharp click of heels against pavement. He barely had time to look up before Karen stormed into his driveway, her face contorted with fury, her phone clenched in her trembling fist. "You did this!" she shrieked, thrusting the screen in his face. "You're trying to destroy me!" Liam didn't so much as blink. "I didn't ruin anything, Karen," he replied, voice steady. "Your family did that all on their own." "You have no right," she spat, her whole body trembling. "That's all lies. My grandfather was a war hero, not some—" "You can keep telling yourself that," Liam interrupted coolly. "But the truth's out now, and people aren't happy." Karen's breath came in short, ragged bursts. The rage in her eyes was nearly feral, her fingers twitching like she wanted to claw at him. And then, in an act of sheer desperation, she made her final, fateful mistake. She lunged, or at least she tried to. Fueled by blind fury, but slowed by her own unsteady movements, she barely got 2 steps before she stumbled forward. Just as she teetered on the edge of regaining her balance, the unmistakable glare of red and blue lights bathed the street. The cops had arrived. Turns out, Karen had been spiraling ever since the article went live, spewing hateful, unhinged rants all over the internet, threatening lawsuits, revenge, even making veiled threats toward the coward who exposed her. Someone had flagged her behavior, and law enforcement had been keeping tabs. The moment the officer stepped out of the squad car, Karen froze. Then, just as quickly, she unraveled. "This is all fake," she screamed, voice cracking. "He's trying to make me look bad. I'm the victim here." But when the officers moved toward her, she did the one thing no one expected. She ran. It was almost pathetic to watch. A woman who had spent her life looking down on others, now scrambling like a cornered animal. She barely made it 20 feet before her foot caught on the curb, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. Within seconds, she was surrounded. "You're under arrest for filing false reports and attempted assault," an officer stated as they snapped the cuffs around her wrists. Liam didn't move. He simply watched as they hauled her up and led her toward the squad car. For the first time in weeks, the tightness in his chest loosened. He exhaled. Karen had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable, that she could stomp over anyone she pleased without ever facing the consequences. Today, that changed, and Liam had made sure of it. She barely registered his words. The air in the courtroom felt thick, suffocating. Too many eyes bore into her, their silent judgment pressing down like a weight on her chest. Sweat trickled down the back of her neck. Her throat tightened, but she forced out the words anyway. "Not guilty," she muttered, her voice barely more than a croak. Judge Harris remained impassive. He gave a small nod, then turned to the prosecutor. "Proceed." What followed was 30 minutes of unrelenting humiliation. The prosecutor laid everything out in excruciating detail: Karen's repeated harassment, the fabricated 911 call, her threats, and of course, the footage of her pitiful attempt to flee the police. Witnesses took the stand, each one reinforcing the damning narrative. Liam spoke with quiet resolve, his testimony supported by crystal-clear security footage of Karen throwing a tantrum by the pool like a spoiled child denied a toy. Karen shifted uncomfortably, her face cycling through a spectrum of colors, flushed red with anger, then draining to a sickly pale as the weight of reality pressed in. Then, Judge Harris's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Ms. Reynolds, your actions represent some of the most blatant displays of entitlement and discrimination I have ever witnessed in this courtroom." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have repeatedly trespassed, attempted to manipulate law enforcement to target an innocent man, and displayed utter contempt for the law. Given the pattern of your behavior, I have serious concerns about your lack of accountability. Do you have anything to say before I move forward with sentencing?" That was when Karen snapped. She shot up from her chair so fast that it screeched against the floor. "This is bullshit," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the marble walls. "This whole damn system is rigged against me. That thug set me up." A wave of gasps swept through the courtroom. Her lawyer groaned, rubbing a hand down his face, clearly wishing he were anywhere but here. Judge Harris, however, remained perfectly still. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, his voice cool, controlled, "I strongly advise you to compose yourself." But Karen wasn't finished. She jabbed a shaking finger in his direction. "You're just another diversity hire. You don't even deserve to sit on that bench." The room fell into a stunned silence. And then she made the mistake that sealed her fate. "I swear, if I ever see you outside this courtroom..." She never got to finish. The bailiffs were on her in an instant, seizing her by the arms as she struggled and kicked, her voice rising into an incoherent shriek. Judge Harris barely blinked. He calmly adjusted his glasses, then picked up his gavel. "Given your blatant disrespect for this court and your direct threats toward a sitting judge, I am extending your sentence beyond the initial recommendation," he declared, his voice firm, final. Karen's face crumpled. "No, you can't do that." But it was already done. The gavel struck with a sharp, decisive crack. Sentencing will be issued immediately. Karen had dug her own grave. Now she had to lie in it. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Karen was dragged away, still kicking, still screaming. But it didn't matter. The decision was final. Her fate was sealed. Karen was sentenced to 1 year in jail for trespassing, filing false police reports, and threatening a judge. What had begun as a minor case had escalated into something far more severe, all because she refused to control her own hatred. News of the incident spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with reactions, and people wasted no time tearing Karen apart. The video of her courtroom meltdown racked up millions of views in mere days. Memes flooded the internet. "Imagine being racist and dumb enough to threaten a judge," one user wrote. "Plot twist. She thought the pool was free, but jail is really free," another joked. Reporters began digging into her past. And just like that, the skeletons in Karen's closet were dragged into the light. Her family's deep ties to the KKK. Her long history of harassing black neighbors. Old complaints from previous workplaces detailing her racist behavior. Karen wasn't just humiliated, she was cancelled. Meanwhile, Liam finally had peace. For the first time in months, he could enjoy his home without worry. No more Karen sneaking in, no more complaints, no more cops showing up at his door. The whole neighborhood, long exhausted by Karen's behavior, came together in support of Liam. That weekend, his neighbors organized a small gathering in his honor. They decorated the backyard, laid out trays of homemade dishes, and assembled by the pool, their laughter and conversation filling the air. But this wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about taking a stand against prejudice, about showing solidarity and proving that community meant more than just living next to one another. As Liam looked around at the smiling faces, he felt something settle in his chest, a sense of belonging, of peace. He had worked hard for this home, not just for the walls and the pool, but for the life it represented. And now he had exactly that. As for Karen, she sat in a cold jail cell, no pool in sight, no one to bail her out. She had spent her life looking down on others, but now she was at the lowest point imaginable, and karma had no sympathy for people like her. All right, guys, that's the story. And before we wrap up, let me just say, this isn't a real story, but man, does it hold some real lessons. At its core, this is a story about entitlement, privilege, and the deep-rooted racism that still lingers in society. Justin didn't just fight for his right to enjoy his own home. He fought against a mindset that believed he shouldn't have had it in the first place. Karen's behavior wasn't just about a pool. It was about control, about the idea that some people should always be on top and others should know their place. But here's the thing, Karen's downfall wasn't caused by anyone but herself. She felt untouchable, like the rules didn't apply to her. And the moment she was forced to face the consequences, she unraveled. This is what happens when people who have never been held accountable finally hit a wall. The biggest takeaway? Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's hidden behind fake smiles, passive-aggressive words, and the belief that someone doesn't belong somewhere. But standing up to it, calling it out, exposing it, that is how we push back. So, what do you guys think? Have you ever experienced or witnessed entitlement like this? Let's talk about it in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this story and want more like it, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, real change starts when we refuse to stay silent. See you in the next one.